Speciation is the process by which new species come into being. What is a species? Biologists, how do we define a species? This is the biological species concept. Okay? It defines species as members of the same group that can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. Sounds pretty straightforward. Makes sense. In Puget Sound, we have a group of animals called the southern resident orcas. There are about 80 of them now. Okay? Their males are about 30 feet long, weigh about 10 tons. There's another group of orcas that sometimes swim in our waters called transients. They're just as big. Now, we've never witnessed them interbreeding. They look a lot alike, not exactly alike. A well-trained person could differentiate between them. But as far as we know, they don't hang out together. Here's the question. Are they members of the same species? You want to try breeding a 30-foot long, 10-ton animal? Now here's the question. Even if you were to get the berry white going, get the mood lighting just right, get a really big tank, and they did, you know, let's get it up. Yeah, that's Marvin Gaye. Even if they did go there, is that really what would happen in the wild? Is that realistic? So, the biological species definition is a great definition. It's the one I tend to use most often, particularly in my Biology 100 classes. But the reality is that it has limitations. Because it's not, and what do you do, here's another example. What do you do with extinct species? Right? You've got the fossil of this thing here, you've got a fossil of that thing there. You're like, they look a lot alike, right? No, unless we know that they could interbreed, like how do you breed fossils? Okay. See what I'm saying? Okay. So there are multiple definitions for a species. So this is the biological species concept. There's the morphological species concept. This is the looks like a duck. It's a duck, right? Right? If they look the same, they're the same. Okay? Basically based upon different anatomical features, maybe totally inaccurate. And there have been long periods of time where we thought that that like this group was all one species, and we found like, no, it's actually two separate species. Because they're not interbreeding, they're not interrelated at all. Ideally, whatever definition we use has some basis in evolution, that these individuals share the same evolutionary history. Not always the case. Oftentimes we use diagnostic characteristics. Any birders out there? Bird watchers? No? It's too bad. Well, it's fun. So this is classic, this is the time of year to see warblers. If you want to see a warbler, now it's time of year to see a warbler. Different coloration, right? These are morphological diagnostic characteristics that people use. You'll do this with your plant list. You'll look at different parts of the flower to help identify that. I cut it. Dang it. There are other ways in which we can morphologically identify birds. What's the other way in which you can identify birds if you can't see them? What's that? Like you never see it. The calls, right? They've got different calls. You can identify them based upon they're called. And that can be, you know, unique to those species. There are some frogs, for example, where we literally can't tell the difference between the species. Like, you look at them, you're like, same exact measure, but they've got different calls. The important thing is that they can tell the difference, right? Oh, by the way, that's what was going on here. One of the reasons that birds make calls is to get mates, right? Like, yo, I'm ready. So it's usually the male who's making the call. And then the female shows up, the male's like, I gotta show my stuff. And he does a dance, he's doing his dance. It's funny here, he's doing the dance. She's not a member of the same species. She's like watching like, wow, that's funny. All right, see ya. All right. The phylogenetic species concept ideally is what we try to get to. This is where it's based upon the phylogeny, the evolutionary history of the organism. This is really hard to figure out though, because you need to know its full evolutionary history, which oftentimes relies on the fossil record, which is super incomplete. What we have moved to now, this is what we're going to get to later on, this lesson or the next one, I can't remember which one it is DNA, right? We can now look at the DNA and see how closely related individuals are. But funny things happen when you look at the DNA. For example, humans and chimpanzees, mostly the same DNA. Like, we're super closely related to chimpanzees, like really, really closely related to chimpanzees. So closely related, in fact, that some people really argue whether or not we should be keeping them in cages at all, right? Because we are really, like 98% of our DNA is the same, like really, really close related. Okay, so how do new species come into being? Through this process of speciation. So, what we call a species can vary based upon the definition we're using, but what we do know is that for a species, in order for us to get new species, this has to happen. We must have genetic divergence of reproductively isolated populations. Two parts. Genetic divergence. The genetics have to be different from one population to the next. If you have the same genetics, then probably members of the same species. And those two different populations have to be reproductively isolated. Not just isolated, but reproductively isolated. Now, chances are, if you're geographically isolated, you're also reproductively isolated. Is that correct? If you're not in physical proximity with another member of your same species, can you have sex with them?
Plants?
What's that?
What about plants?
Depends on how close you get, yeah. I mean, so they're a broadcast spawning organism, but you still have to be close enough. Like, I mean, you couldn't, like a plant here in Seattle couldn't mate with a plant in Texas. I guess possibly, right? Like you can like have some pollen stuck on something and it travels. You can go a long ways. Yeah, I remember this. Yeah. But there can't be an exchange of genetic material between individuals. That's really what it comes down to, right? If they're still exchanging genetic information, then biological species concept kicks in. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. What happens if we take a population and divide it, and these two populations are now reproductively isolated from each other? They're no longer exchanged. Like in here, everybody's having sex with everybody else, right? Like genes are going back and forth. That means that all of the microevolutionary forces are acting on this group as a whole. And any mutations that arise, any genetic drift, any gene flow gets affects everybody here the same. Does that make sense? If a mutation shows up here, it'll spread throughout the population. Right? But if they become genetically isolated from each other, they can no longer exchange genes, and therefore evolution will behave differently on this one versus this one. So that over time, they become so different, they will not reproduce. Right? Okay. Now, it's important to maintain that isolation. Individuals from this population can't be reproducing the individuals from that population, otherwise they'd be different species. So species evolve these barriers so that they can't evolve, they can't reproduce with it. You don't want to have sex with different species. Like, you don't want to do that, right? Not just like because your friends will think you're really weird, but like it's a total waste of resources, right? Like it's a complete waste of resources. Total, yeah, don't do that.
I have a question. So dogs are two different species, right?
Dogs are, no.
All dogs are the same
All dogs are the same species.
No way.
From dachshunds to Great Danes, yeah, they can all reproduce with each other, and they do.
Oh, man.
Yeah, totally. They have they've got a funky variation in their Hox gene that basically allows them to just create these really wild shapes. Yeah, they're all members of the same species. Yeah. Now you do get funny things. We have this little bit, things like ligers, lions and tigers. and they will reproduce together. Same thing when there's a grizzly bear and polar bear hybrids that form. Yeah, so hybrids do happen, but what's up? Yeah, nature.
Are they like fertile offspring though?
Yeah. Yeah, polar bears and grizzly bears are actually really close related to each other. But come to find, this has only been showing up recently. We think what's happened is because of the ice melting in the Arctic, polar bears are venturing farther and farther into more grizzly bear habitat, looking for food. And there have been some cases of this, but come to find out, it really is just like this one super freaky female polar bear, who for whatever reason, she likes the grizzlies. That's her thing. What's up? They can't, yeah. Yeah, they can't. Ligers can't. We'll talk about mules in a little bit. They can't either. They got problems. Yeah. What's up?
We were talking about like how we have lots of technology and not yesterday, Monday, like how we like have some communication that's beneficial, but like thinking about different parts of the world that may not have access to the same technology.
Uh-huh. Humans?
Yes, humans.
So humans have very little genetic variation. We're all very close related to each other. So we're all members of the same species. Could we become isolated from each other? Potentially. You know, it's interesting when you think about Mars. There's this movement for some people to move to Mars. Hopefully all the assholes. So, you know, they would be isolated. And then,
What?
you know, over time,
Study what? Study abroad.
maybe something can happen.
Oh.
But humans are pretty close related to each other. I mean, what's happened historically is, you know, we've created laws that have banned humans interbreeding. That's, you know, but love is stronger than law. And human, what's that? No, I'm not going there. No, what I'm saying is, like, you know, it wasn't that long ago that, like, you know, we had this whole note, like, there was a legal definition of race and members of separate races. This is why I heard this really fascinating thing about, there's this great, what's it called? Invisibilia. I love podcasts. Great podcast called Invisibilia. Anyway, there was this whole thing on dating amongst Asian Americans. And the stereotype of Asian males as being emasculated, right, in our society. And in part that came from the fact that when East Asian immigrants first moved to the United States in the 1800s, they were not allowed to bring women with them, right? Because it was thought that the women were impure or whatever. This is racist. But anyway, so what ended up happening is a lot of the males ended up taking jobs that were typically deemed women's jobs. Right, working in dry cleaning, you know, cleaners or cooks, that sort of thing, right? And so societally, they developed this stigma around, you know, this sort of like they developed this emasculated image, right? Yeah, we get in a lot of cultural baggage. So race doesn't exist. You guys know this, right? I mean, it does exist. That's a social construct. So, like, socially it exists, but biologically there's no basis for race. So we'll get into this a little bit later on. There's no basis. We're all Africans. So, yeah.
Is Homo Neanderthal other species?
It is. It's a cousin species.
So we.
But close enough that we were able to have sex with them and make babies. Yep. So I did my 23andMe last year, and I've got like 0.3% Neanderthal DNA. Yeah. Yeah.
Really?
Something like that. Yeah. I got relatives. It's like 50. Neanderthal. Yeah. We actually just, did you guys see this? I posted this on Canvas. I think I sent you guys an email about it too, maybe. There's found another species of human in this cave in the Philippines. Right? So there used to be other species of humans. We're the only one that's left. And we don't know if that's because we outcompeted them, we killed them, we bred with them. I don't know. But there used to be other humans around. Not anymore, though. We're the only game in town. Yeah. All right. So, how do species maintain reproductive isolation? Through the evolution of isolating mechanisms. Okay? These isolating mechanisms can occur pre-zygotically, before fertilization, or post-zygote, after fertilization. Okay. Here are some pre-zygotic mechanisms. Ecological isolation. Different habitats, right? You can think of birds. Some birds like meadows, some birds like marshes. You could think of snakes. Some snakes like rocky areas, some snakes like moist areas. You think of humans. Some people like cities, some people like country. Temporal isolation. This is the timing of mating. Some birds mate in the spring, most do, but some mate in the fall. Some mate in the summer. Some sing in the morning to find their mate. Some sing at night to find their mate. She's a morning person. He's a night person. Not going to work out. Behavioral isolation. Remember that mating dance I showed you early on? Right? Got to get the right dance. Now, one of the best examples of this. Blah, 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 Watch this. So this is a male and female group. They're dancing. Dancing has always been a great way to select mates. Presence, another great way to select a mate. Flexibility. You want a nubile mate? Can you do that? I can do that. Can you do that? Can you do that? I can do that. Who can hold out longer? It's a hobby, right? Like, how good are your genes? It's a way to show off your genes, right? Yeah.
How am I so confused? The ballerina.
Now, it's this, by the way, I'm going to say it's the same thing in humans. It's the same thing in humans. If you're interested in somebody, I recommend this. Take them dancing. Ladies in particular, if your fella don't dance, get another one. Two things. He should be able to dance in public and cook. If he can't dance and he can't cook,
What if he can't do it?
what's that? What if she can't cook? All right. So that's behavioral isolation. And trust me, the guys I know who can't dance are definitely. All right, mechanical isolation. What do you think mechanical isolation is? Tab A don't fit in slot B. You guys know I'm getting at? Great example of this are in flowers. Right? So we'll get to flowers later on, we'll get to plant reproduction. We'll see that pollinators, birds, insects, go and they get the pollen, but the size and the shape of the flower is really important. If it's not the right size and the shape, the pollen will not be transferred adequately. What do you think I was talking about? Gametic isolation. Usually this means that the sperm dies, right? By the way, this is kind of cool. We now realize, used to be, for a World War II mindset, we thought that in humans, the sperm was like an advancing army. It's like, take that hill! Right? Like we're gonna go in and get that egg! Right? That's not really actually how it works. Come to find out, there's within the vagina, within the birth canal, and within the cervix, there are these little pockets called sugar rooms. And they're little places where there's sugars set up to give the sperm some energy to keep it moving. And the female can kind of decide which sperm she wants, to a certain extent, not always to the sperm she wants. So she's not just like an active, she's not just a passive participant, all that. Or like in ducks. Shit. Do you know about duck penises? Most birds don't have penises. They get in the way of the whole flying thing. But ducks have ballistic penises. They're longer than they are. They got these corkscrew ballistic penises. Seriously, like a mallard duck this big, like a penis this big. And when they have sex with her, it's really disgusting. But they just hang up on the female. And they're all shooting in her. But the female has these muscles inside her cloaca. and they get to like, she sends the things off in a different direction. So she kind of gets to choose like which.
What?
All right. Post-zygote.
Okay.
How about right whales?
What?
Like one right whale ejaculation is like 10 gallons.
Oh, yeah.
It's insane. And there are like multiple males for one. It's insane. It's totally insane. But the idea is that like it's so much that it flushes out the other guy's. That's nuts.
She told me
Okay.
seawater is salty.
I think I've got a
Girl's
link.
sperm.
I think there's a TED talk by a woman in there.
I started joking.
Like
I don't know.
sex other species gets wild. Like really just like nuts. Firebrands, these little silverfish things,
Ew.
they tie each other. There's one that it like the female, she the male cuts her back open. Yeah, the Suriname toad. You seen the Suriname toad? She has little holes in her back that the babies develop. Anyway, okay. Post-zygote, so this is after the zygote forms. So things that will keep the species separate. Hybrid inviability. So the hybrid, it just doesn't work. The hybrid doesn't, it dies. Hybrid sterility. This is what happens in the case of the donkey, the horse, and the mule. Now, the donkey and the horse have different numbers of chromosomes, which is why the mule is sterile, because the chromosomes can't meet up for meiosis. Why have we bred the mule? Anybody know? What's that? It's strong like a donkey, but it is
A horse.
smart like a horse. Yeah, it's strong and smart. And the last one is, we call it hybrid breakdown. It just means that it does produce a hybrid, but the hybrid has reduced fitness. It just isn't that. It's not healthy. Okay. Now, some species do hybridize, which makes you wonder if they're really separate species or not, but we'll get into that on Monday. Elena, what's up? We're going to do this on Monday. Wait, we got it. Okay? All right, you guys have a great weekend. Wish me luck. I'm going to do my first ever Spartan race.
Okay.